What if the most honest version of yourself isn't found in therapy, books, or meditation, but in a movie? A story you thought was fiction suddenly becomes autobiography, not because you lived it, but because it lived in you. You weren't watching a character fall apart. You were watching a part of yourself, the part you keep quiet, the part you buried under routine and being fine. Psychological films aren't entertainment. They're revelations, wrapped in fiction, but dripping with truth. You sit down expecting a story, but you get a mirror, and it doesn't flatter. A beautiful mind, Shutter Island. These aren't just films with plot twists. They are diagnoses. They whisper truths about schizophrenia, about trauma, about denial and survival. And the most uncomfortable part? You recognize yourself. You recognize how far your mind will go to protect itself from pain, even if it has to lie to you. You start to ask questions. How real is my reality? What parts of me have I silenced? What truths have I traded for comfort? This isn't passive viewing. This is self-confrontation, because sometimes the scariest thing you can watch is your own reflection, played by someone else on a screen. At first glance, A Beautiful Mind is about brilliance, John Nash, math prodigy, Nobel laureate, genius. But look deeper and you'll see it's about something far more human, the battle between what we know and what we believe. Nash doesn't know he's sick. He doesn't know his world isn't real, because to him, it feels real. And feelings, they can overpower facts. His hallucinations aren't just images. They're relationships, people he trusts, a friend, a little girl, even a government agent. When the truth comes, it doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as grief. Because letting go of a delusion is like losing a part of yourself. And yet, he chooses to fight. Not by erasing the voices, but by ignoring them. This isn't a victory through medicine. It's a decision. Every day, he chooses to not believe what his mind tells him. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Self-awareness, in its rawest form, is realizing you can't always trust your thoughts. That sometimes, truth is not what feels real, but what stays when the feelings fade. Nash teaches us you don't have to eliminate your demons, you just have to stop listening to them. Teddy Daniels thinks he's a US Marshal. He's not. He believes he's hunting a criminal. He's not. The real criminal is inside, buried in a truth so painful that the only way to live with it was to forget it entirely. Teddy isn't his real name. His life story, fabricated. His mission, fiction. Because the reality, that he's Andrew Laerdis, a man who lost his mind after his wife drowned their children, is too devastating to accept. So his mind does something extraordinary. It builds a narrative. It creates meaning. It tells him a story that makes sense. Just not true. This is not madness. This is protection. When trauma cuts too deep, the brain doesn't scream. It edits. It hides. It builds a safer version of reality. Not to deceive, but to survive. Shutter Island isn't about insanity. It's about mercy. The mercy of a mind doing everything it can to not break completely. And in the end, the question isn't, what's real? It's, which lie can I live with? Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, or worse, it rewrites the story. When reality becomes too heavy to carry, the mind steps in, not to fix, but to protect. We call them defense mechanisms: denial, projection, repression, fantasy. They don't just happen in psychology books. They happen in us, every day. You've done it. You've told yourself, it didn't matter. It wasn't that bad. I'm fine. Not because it's true, but because the truth would break something inside you. And the mind, it wants to keep things intact, even if it means distorting them. Shutter Island wasn't fiction. It was a map of what the mind does when truth becomes unbearable. We all build islands, little stories to keep the chaos at bay, narratives that make pain digestible. But there's a cost. The more we lie to ourselves, the harder it gets to recognize what's real. And so silence returns, not as peace, but as suppression. Because not every quiet mind is calm. Sometimes it's drowning in truths it chose to forget. You watch a film and you think it's about someone else, a character, a breakdown, a story, but something clicks, a sentence, a glance, a silence, and suddenly you feel exposed. That's not fiction. That's your subconscious being triggered. Psychological films don't teach like lectures. They awaken like memories. They bypass the logic gate and head straight to what's hidden. You don't cry because it's sad. You cry because it touched something you didn't know still hurt. This is the magic of cinema. A beautiful mind makes you ask, what lies have I accepted as real? Shutter Island forces you to confront, what pain have I refused to face? And every film like these, if you're willing to watch with your inner eye, becomes a therapy session. Not because it fixes you, but because it shows you what needs attention. You don't just leave the theater with thoughts, you leave with questions. And those questions, they echo, they stay. Because real healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with a disturbing recognition. I've seen this pain before, and it's mine. The film ends. The screen fades. But something lingers. Not just the soundtrack in your head, not just the imagery burned into your eyes, but a feeling, a quiet disruption. You sit there, but you're not the same person who pressed play, because what you just watched wasn't just a story, it was a confrontation. And now you're left with the echo of something unspoken. The silence after a psychological film isn't blank, it's loaded. Loaded with the faces you related to too closely, the truths you saw but didn't want to name, the pain that didn't belong to the character, but to you. This is where cinema becomes spiritual, not religious, but revelatory. It holds up a mirror, then steps aside and lets you sit with what you see. Maybe you walk away. Or maybe you pause, just long enough to ask, what illusion am I still living in, just to avoid the truth? The screen is dark now. The film is over. But the story it unlocked in you, that one's just beginning. Because real self-awareness doesn't end with a conclusion. It begins with a haunting silence you can no longer ignore. So here's the question. If someone made a film about your mind, would you be brave enough to watch it all the way through?